In celebration of summer, we are featuring the top 10 episodes of 40 Thrive ever. Next up, number 7.
You're listening to the 40 Thrive Podcast, the show created for women 40 and beyond, ready to shake things up. And now, your host, Jackie McDougall.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the 40 Thrive Podcast. If you're here for the first time, well, hello there. You look nice. So if you spend any time online, you've probably witnessed a kerfuffle or two. Oh my gosh, isn't that a great word? Kerfuffle. As a group leader myself, it's sometimes a delicate dance when moderating a group of strong, passionate, badass women. And I am not alone here. Elsie Escobar, my guest today, co-runs the largest community for women in podcasting with a corresponding podcast, of course, called She Podcasts. Their sole mission is to empower women to continue to share their voices while creating a safe community of podcasting education and support. You may remember Elsie from the 40 Thrive Podcast episode 12. She is as passionate as I am about helping women find their superpowers and share it with the world. But like me, as a leader in the online space, we're sometimes subject to some not so happy people. I was in the She Podcast group one day and I saw a post that I can really only describe as angry. The poster was going off on, I don't even remember what. But Elsie was basically the target. While many people would fire back immediately, I watched the whole thing unfold in a totally surprising way. I watched Elsie act like a grown-ass woman. I know, online. And she took responsibility and opened up the conversation to so much more than the original poster's complaint. In that moment, I was like, we need to talk about this in the 40 Thrive podcast. We're living in a time where it's so easy to go off the handle, especially online. What would life look like if we armed ourselves with tools and strategies to help us navigate our online relationships? And it might actually help us improve our offline relationships. I really hope you enjoyed this thought-provoking conversation I had with Elsie Escobar. Elsie, welcome to the 40 Thrive podcast.
Woohoo!
So I want to get into this topic that I saw online. I don't even know how it started, but it doesn't even matter. What happened was you made a post in the group that caught my attention. I think at this point I've read it probably 8 times, but it was an extremely insightful, thoughtful, solution-based way to look at how one shows up online. So somebody posted something and was frustrated and it sort of felt like an attack a little bit. Mm-hmm. And you did not take that opportunity to clap back, as they say, but you took a few days. You actually said, I'm going to take a few days or I'm going to take some time to think about this. And then you came back with this extremely thoughtful response. First of all, what is going on online where people are just like, even with their own names backing them on Facebook, that they feel like this is the place to just attack? What do you think is going on?
I feel that this is like a fourth dimension, if you will, this is the first time we're working on this, that we're working as a culture. I'm not even sure, like most of our kids haven't really had an opportunity to not know what this is, right? This online interaction. Like our generation did have that time where there were phone calls. And that's about the extent of it. Like, you could call your friend on the phone and you could be on the phone for a while. But this sort of like back and forth conversation that is essentially 24/7 and nonstop without any barriers of entry at all. And I'm not saying because you don't belong, but I'm saying like a lot of the time we used to find out news when people woke up in the morning. Right? Like breaking news when you woke up in the morning, maybe you call your best friend or something on the phone. Did you hear these news? And then it was like a one-on-one conversation. Maybe when you went to drop your kids off to school, you might have a friend there or something, but you didn't go to drop your kids off to school and then like park in the parking lot. And then everybody talked about the news in the morning, like from car to car. Like that was just not like what? But now this is essentially what's happening. So we are in a situation we're not used to, number one, commenting on everything and having this barrage of information coming at you all the time. It's like none of us were ever with that much input and output happening at the same time. And I have a feeling at this moment, we haven't figured out that we don't have to comment on everything. You know what I mean?
It's such an amazing concept. I mean, I will tell you, not that long ago, I was probably one of those righteous people online who had to fix every wrong, to right every wrong. And I think some of it had to do with the fact that I was hosting a podcast that was about current events.
Correct.
And it included a lot of political stuff. And so I felt like, well, I need to give my opinion. And I will say my life is actually so much happier since I don't do that podcast, only because I have a little mantra. You do not have to right every wrong online. You do not have to right every wrong online. And I just moved past it. And I've been known to write a comment and then delete it because I'm like, I do not have to right every wrong online. It is not my job. And I don't know if it's an over 40 thing or if it's just the fact that I choose to live a happier life. You're absolutely right that we did live in a time where maybe your neighbor across the street was so politically opposite from where you are or had a belief system, but you would say hello and you would have small talk and you would talk about the weather. You didn't necessarily see how they felt about every single thing like you do now that you're Facebook friends.
There's that kind of a sense. And I don't think that as a society at this moment, maybe, my daughters are 7 and 10, and I'm wondering if maybe they'll be able to, as a generation, start to figure out what the best practices are. And because this is adding, again, this is a whole new layer of behavior. And we are coming into this behavior as adults. Right? So we're stepping into this as actual, and I'm saying mature because we've lived, well, for the 40 Thrive folks, at least 4 decades.
Right.
And so we've got a way in which we behave. And now we have this extra thing that we're adding to the table. And we don't quite know what to do. And we just go with the impulse control, right? Like with just whatever that impulse is. And the other thing that I have to talk about, and I think that this is actually my biggest thing right now, is the fact that these platforms have been strategically created to create habitual patterns of behavior and compulsive actions. They have been designed that way. They are there to push our buttons, to trigger those little dopamine hits, and to get us to have that transfer into our brains so that we are really in sort of like a habit addiction loop. And so even though we may think we're in control a lot of the time, everything around, particularly things like Facebook, are set up to trigger us. They're set up for engagement and for that kind of interaction, every little thing. And I saw a comment from somebody, and I forgot who said this, but every time somebody gives you a little like on what you post online, or they comment on it, or they give you a clap or a little heart on Instagram or whatever, it actually gives you a little dopamine hit in your brain. You look at it and it makes you feel good in some way. We check it all the time because we want that hit. And we actually don't know what those incredible amounts of dopamine hits into our brains are doing to our brains. We don't know. There's been no research done around this. So we have these little tiny electrical inputs, right? And we don't think about this kind of stuff, but you don't know how that's creating a new way for your brain to perceive likes and dislikes. And so we have this like compulsion within our behavior of, if I do this and I don't get X, is it worth it? And so I started to do an experiment at the beginning of this year. Part of it was based on what you were saying, like you don't have to right all the wrongs and stuff. And for me, it wasn't necessarily about righting wrongs. It was about my own behavior, because I was really looking at myself and wondering, like, when do I need to respond? And when am I wanting to just put stuff out there because it makes me feel good? Like literally just, hey, I'm at the grocery store and I found this amazing chocolate. Like, we sometimes feel like we have to post that online. Like, we have this incredible feeling of wanting to do
honey,
that.
It's chocolate, Elsie. Please,
well, I know.
Post it.
Well, there's that.
We need to know.
That is true. But so what I started to do is that there's this app called Day One. And I've had this app for a long time, since like its inception. I started hearing about it, but it's gotten so much better and so beautiful. And so essentially what it is, it's a journaling app. That's what it, at its core, that's what it is. But people use it for a lot of different ways. They're really, really, really cool. There's a podcast for them too. The Day One podcast. It's really cool. That's another strategy for an app company out there. They have a podcast to showcase how people are using their app. And then they talk about workflow and they talk about productivity. So it's really great because not only does it, teach about productivity, but also about their app, and it gives you insight into their process and stuff. The reason that I use Day One is kind of like my own social media place. So nobody sees what I write. But when I have that trigger to share an image, particularly of my kids or the family, or like there's something so weird that I'm like, oh my God, what the heck is this? And I take a picture of it, or there's a product that I find, or whatever comes into my own head. Instead of putting it on social media, I will just write it on my Day One app. And it's so pretty that I can go back and I could read the stuff. And most of the time, I don't really care that it's not being read by anybody else or seen by anybody else, because in truth, it's really just for me. There's a lot of the times that we feel like we need to be seen and heard and acknowledged. And when I see my own Day One journal, I go, oh, I see me. Oh, this is cool. Like, it makes me feel happy, especially weeks later when I look back at all the stuff that I wrote that was so random. It makes me happy. It didn't need to be out anywhere else. And so it's kind of breaking the pattern to have to put everything up that comes into my head. And it's made me super specific about what I do write on social media, because it's been very deliberate. So there is it's not just like, oh, Elsie decided to just write this down, because in all honesty, I really don't want to engage with a conversation on whether or not you feel that my choice of chocolate is the best, because that's what tends to happen. If I say this is the best chocolate, then somebody is bound to come in there and go, have you tried this chocolate? This is the best. Or, that company is totally not the best company ever. They've got, I don't know, they're totally destroying Africa. And you're like, oh my God. I just wanted to post about chocolate. What's happening?
Well, and that's absolutely true, because you can post the most benign picture or information, and there is often some sort of deeper conversation that people bring up. Sometimes it's actually been nice for me to say something and then somebody comes in and adds to it. I love that, especially being an entrepreneur, working by myself in my home office.
Right.
I think I crave that connection sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, in 2019, I'm trying to see people more often, because I find myself desperate for that connection throughout the day, because I'll be working, head down working, and then the kids will come home, and then I'm head down with the kids. Right. And I don't necessarily have that adult interaction. So I think that social media has existed for many people in that way, whether they are stay-at-home moms or entrepreneurs or whatever it is. So I do like the idea sometimes that somebody will add a layer to something, and I learn something. I love learning new things. But at the same time, it seems like it's an invitation to argue over things when maybe it is a benign post about chocolate and suddenly we're talking about whatever it is.
I do feel that there's a valuable exchange of ideas and things like that. Absolutely, how you're talking about. And I think part of it for me was also that I was splitting my own thought process in my own brain kind of thing. There was a point where I just couldn't finish a thought, right? Because I started something, and then in the middle of thinking that, all of a sudden there's something else, and all of a sudden there's something else. And I ended up that my time wasn't being focused on actually developing the ideas and the concepts and the conversations that I really feel were necessary, and was engaging in, I can't say meaningless, because it wasn't meaningless, but not necessarily adding to my life, to further a goal, if you will, to further something more. And I thought, like, okay, do I really need to be discussing this? And the other thing is, not everybody's like this, but I really like to take care of conversations. I hate to leave things open. If you leave me a comment, I'd like to respond to it. I'd like to engage in some way. And I found that whenever I see those little dots or like those little notification thingies and they haven't gone away, it kind of triggers me to not be able to focus on the other thing until I take care of it. It's sort of, that's just OCD, I think, that I have online. And I started to realize, okay, I can't do that because it's taking up my time with these mundane tasks of clearing notifications, even if it's mark them all read, throwing out the trash, if you will, and making sure that everybody's responded to until I can move forward. And I have to address that in terms of me for like a behavioral thing where I'm like, this is stopping my actual productivity, taking care of these small little things that really aren't adding any value to any community at all. And what is the conversation that I want to be having? And that's why I took time. It was like one of the first times when I responded to that conversation, I really wanted to sit down and parse it out. And I sat for like literally a day and a half in my brain. Like I could not finish any other thoughts. I was like, this is so important. I was taking notes for myself, and I kind of wrote things over and over again and refined them. And I had one of my friends read it over, and she gave me some grammar notes, and she just kind of repeated back to me what I meant to make sure that I was getting across what I wanted, because I feel that it's important. Like, words really matter, and I really wanted to get this across. And you can't do that all of a sudden, just like writing something online really quickly. It doesn't work. Usually it bites you in the behind.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so there are so many things in this post that caught my attention. How did you feel emotionally about what that person was saying? Did it make you question yourself? Did it make you want to respond to them in biting, angry words?
No, it actually, my reaction was, I was hurt. The first feeling upon reading it was like I was angry. You know, it was more like, who do you think you are saying this? You know, that was my first thought. Mm-hmm. The second thought was, she's totally right. Because the thing is, part of our reaction, I think, online is all ego driven. And most of the time, whenever you get to a situation where somebody does something or says something, the first thing that responds is really not you standing up for anybody else. It really is you standing up for yourself. It's all about you. It's all about your ego. You move because you don't want to be wrong, or you don't want to be attacked. Like, you don't want to have that feeling, or whether or not. And this is the other thing too. Attacking is perceived. It's not acted upon. And so, meaning the intention of somebody writing something online, I guarantee you about 80% is not meant as an attack. It's meant as feedback or commentary.
You think?
Oh, yeah. Most people receive it as an attack. Mm-hmm. Because it's clear and focused. Because I've been observing all of this behavior for so long, particularly following politics and culture, and seeing conversations, particularly of women of color or people who are underrepresented in the political space or in cultural spaces, and when they are often not heard. And what tends to happen is marginalized voices tend to have to get louder and say, why are you doing this? This is not okay. And then my voice, I'm just using the tone because I'm not being clear in terms of what I'm against, whatever, in terms of language. I wanted to keep it open. But the perception is that on the other side is like, you are attacking me because your tone, because your voice, because why can't you say it nicely? And so, but there is
and if you're a woman, you should be smiling while you
Exactly. And so there is a level of perception, but if you do speak in quote that way, and you want to put yourself in a little thing and go like, excuse me, would you mind like maybe not saying that anymore? It's like, are they going to stop? Is that, right. I mean, has that worked in the past? I don't think so.
No.
So
yeah, you're right.
So there's
and the problem is many of these, especially women, because your group is over 11,000 women,
right?
Many of them who are either podcasters or becoming podcasters, or for whatever reason they're in there, even though they're supposed to be at least tied to podcasting. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, the post that we're talking about had nothing to do with podcasting.
Right, exactly. So, yes.
So,
correct.
But I think that these women are looking for a voice in one way, shape, or form. Or maybe some of them, I don't know them all personally, but I know a lot of women that I talk to over 40 who feel invisible and not mm-hmm. heard. Mm-hmm. So imagine this platform where you can be heard and be seen and then using it to like make sure that people are hearing you and seeing you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's different from, you know, being at the carpool line where maybe you're not feeling secure, but I'm in this group of podcasters. I can just blast my thoughts so freely.
What I always have found, and I wrote it from the experience because I've been doing online management for now like almost over a decade. And I started obviously independently. When I did start my podcast in 2006, it was a really, really tiny little community, which was primarily Twitter based and email based. That's how there was that back and forth. And there was also comments on the blog and things like that. So I did have a very engaged audience from the beginning. Transferring over to managing the community over at Libsyn, which is also very big, obviously not like She Podcast. She Podcast is more specific and primarily within Facebook. But Libsyn is a lot bigger, and it is in all of the social media areas. And you do get some very mean people. I mean, very mean people. People who are absolutely lying and are absolutely attacking, for sure. They are the 20%. And what I have found is that a lot of the time when somebody is literally saying, I hate you, you suck, then if I come back with, goodness gracious, I am so sorry, how can I help? They usually are quiet, and then they become like sweet little birds, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I just couldn't get into my account and I didn't know until, you know, and then you're like, oh my God. There was one guy I remember very specifically, he was just not happy. He triggered me in every single way possible. I literally was going to have a heart attack from the stress that this man was giving me online. I was at the museum with my daughters, and it was like 3 years ago. And my heart was beating 1,000 degrees. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk to this man. So I said, I'm going to be on Skype. This is my Skype number. I'm turning it on. I was on my phone. Please talk with me. I'm here. And we had a conversation for about 30 minutes, and now he loves me to death. I was on his show. And he's like, you know, we went back and forth. Like now every time he has a problem, he just goes, hey, Elsie, can you check on this for me? And I'm like, sure, here you go. And I'll do that. And it really was because, again, it was human to human, and I wasn't there to beat him up. So he was beating me up, and I essentially went back and I really met him as a human being. And I acknowledged the fact that he was, in fact, having trouble. I didn't apologize for anything we did. And if you can just acknowledge somebody and be all, and I mean, truly, and I wasn't being, you know, sarcastic or nothing. I mean, from the fullness of who I am so sorry that happened. Most people deflate because they have nothing to fight against. And so right. For me, that's been a huge learning experience, because once you get past that initial, what we perceive as an attack, real conversation can come through from there. Like people don't know quite how to handle being heard, which is like a whole other thing.
Yeah, well, so, we beg for it. And then we're heard, and then we don't know what to do with that.
I think what we end up losing out on, especially nowadays, and even in She Podcast, that show me as well, and through our individual platforms, we really need to know how to de-escalate situations. We need to bring that skill set to the table. Like, we have to know how to do that. There's no training for this. Right? It doesn't, I mean, most of us are at this moment learning skills on how to make money, how to market, copy, funnels, affiliate links, how, like the different business models of how to bring money in, how to negotiate contracts, like all of this stuff that are all these skills that are important, but nobody really teaches us how to manage and de-escalate community interactions or communications. This is something that is important in the online space as well. And also, one thing that has really helped me has been starting to study nonviolent communication and starting to figure out, like, when does this apply? How can I apply these practices as a leader in this space? And how I can emulate or model a behavior that I wish to cultivate in here. There's nothing, I mean, I'm sure that there's times when you're yelling at your kids going, yelling is not acceptable in this house. You know, you are essentially doing exactly what you want them not to do.
Exactly.
But you're telling them not to do it. And so there's a weird sort of thing happening, which is like they're seeing you yell and yet they're not allowed to. Like that makes no sense. So I've had to check myself like that with my girls. I mean, I'm still working on it and I am not perfect, especially. And so they teach me a little bit of this stuff because I do lose it. Sometimes I'm just like, will you just shut up? Stop it. Get out of my face. And
well, at least you have a yoga background, so you could probably like get them into meditation or
oh
something.
God, sure. But
Let's go with that.
Yeah, let's go with that. But like the de-escalation practices, I think are so important. And there is a woman that I found online, and I'm just going to give her a shout out, even though I don't even know who she is. So her website is thousandwaves.org. Okay. And it's a martial arts and self-defense center. So she's got all of these assertive communication de-escalation PDFs that she put out. And it's really interesting because it's basically to the nth degree, meaning that these de-escalation practices happen when your life is in danger. Like if somebody, like let's say with a gun is in front of you or something, and it's like, the bank is being robbed and the guy with the gun and he's really angry and crazy. Like at that level, like how do you de-escalate a situation that has gotten to that degree? But these practices can be applied with our online back and forth. And they're
that
really
website, I'm going to put that website in the show notes, but it's thousandwaves.org.
Yeah.
So the number 1,000, well, spelled out. So
yeah, anyway. Absolutely. And it's like she breaks it down here where she says it's like the biological basis of de-escalation. And she explains how de-escalation is really about calming someone down who is temporarily out of control, which means that
I love that she defines de-escalation.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. So it's really cool. And it's kind of seen as an emergency. But at the same time, you have to understand when you're an online leader, when there are times when you need to step in to de-escalate the situation, even though there might be something completely heinous and horrible happening, there has to be a moment where you de-escalate the situation so that real communications start to come through. Because if you don't do that, it's just going to come to verbal assaults. And what does that do? It's going to be like, the animals fighting each other. So it's just you energetically as a leader need to step in there and go, okay, everybody, we're going to take this down.
Well, and you don't even have to be a leader in this. How many times have you seen family members online or like, oh, Uncle Steve, you're this, and this. And it's like, whoa, that's going to be an awkward family reunion coming up.
Yep.
Or high school people or, I don't think people understand that when you comment on somebody else who you think they're private, like your other people can see things. So I tell my kids are not on social media. I have no interest nor social media is not part of their immediate future. That's for sure. Because I feel like there are so many things that you cannot experience as tween and teenagers. Mm-hmm. If you're constantly looking at your phone to see what people are doing without you, for you to sit home and look at pictures over and over again of these things happening, I think is really bad for self-esteem and development. Yeah. And so, I think that even as adults, you see a lot of that. But I think that people don't necessarily think that the consequences of their words and their actions online will carry over. It's like this whole, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Yeah. What happens online does not stay online, whether it's neighbors or your community. And so I know that you come from a leadership standpoint, but I think that these methods would apply to anybody online. So how do you look at volatile words or communications and really kind of put them in perspective, but also de-escalate the situation?
I think part of it is seeing the value that it has to culture as a whole, and also self-care, right? If this is a conversation that for you it's going to tear you up, emotionally, and your nervous system's going to be a wreck, step away from it. There's no reason you need to engage in that situation. Our mental health is very, very important, and unfortunately, whatever's happening online is going to leak onto your family. And the last thing I want is for my energy to transfer to my girls and have them be like, what's happening? Why is she, You know, why is she sad? Why am I shaking? You know, because there's a lot of stuff that happens internally. It's a flight or fight response here. And I could put my children in danger in some way. It could be like I'm cooking and I'm so not focused that I could, you know, leave the burners on, or I could forget that I didn't put something in the car before we left, or I don't know, something that is, I know that seems mundane and stuff, but there's a lot of things that could actually cause a lot of harm to our children because we're not paying attention. Stuff that we would forget. So anything that I feel takes you away from your ability to be safe in your own life and with your kids. But we do need to understand that we are, especially if you have children, or your spouse, maybe you don't have, or your significant others, whatever. But if it starts to get to the point where you are leaking this into your people and you can't get yourself together, you have to take care of yourself first, because you do. The other thing is, in terms of the value of the conversation, and again, looking back at what is true. If somebody is coming at you with some kind of negative feedback, or you feel that is an attack on something that you love to do or whatever, you really have to look at that practice, whatever that practice is, whatever their feedback is on, and look at it with like as much honesty as you can to see like, in what way could this be better? Or in what way is this true? And it's just that the messenger happens to be not particularly the best messenger, but maybe the other people might also be thinking at it, but they just don't want to say anything because they kind of don't really want to get into it, kind of thing. It's not that big of a deal for them, but maybe it's true. And then you can see like, oh, okay, maybe I need to address this.
Part of the reason that these people escalate it is because it's in front of other people.
That's right. That's true.
You know, when you are face to face and somebody says, I can't believe you did this. And you go, oh, I'm so sorry. That was not my intention. I apologize. There's nowhere to go. But when you're in public and it's like, oh, look, I am powerful and this person is catering to my power. I can share my power even more. And
That's
so
right.
I'm going to keep this conversation going because I'm so powerful. But if that other person says, hey, let's move this over to email and I'll help you out. You know, it's like, oh, well, you just sucked away all my fun power.
If they're not willing to step into that, then you that's when you tap out. You tap out.
Yeah.
You know, you got to move on. And sometimes things will be solved and sometimes they won't.
Right.
But you have to be able to kind of navigate all that stuff, and that de-escalates it. But again, you also have to see like what value this is bringing to the entire whatever community is that's being seen at that time, because whether we want to or not, we are modeling behavior. And I know for sure, I have watched other leaders in the space have heated, very emotional conversations about really heavy topics in ways that have been constructive, and you see learning happening from everybody. They're not easy, but you see it. So I know it can be done. And I've also seen the opposite, where people lose their entire reputation based on something they said that was either misconstrued or they couldn't say, I'm sorry. You know, and like, at least right now, as I'm watching all these things that are happening politically and leaders coming into the scene, I am floored by our inability as in the political space to just say, I'm sorry. I totally messed up.
Right.
I mean, nobody says
so
that.
Powerful tool to actually say, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And to just, and like, or to be, yeah, instead of doubling up on what you said before. It's just like sometimes you're like, just shut up, dude. Just shut up. You would have been out if you just said, I'm sorry, I'll do better next time, versus just keep on doubling down. No, you don't understand what I meant. I meant to say this. And they just get deeper into the hole. And it's
Right.
just shut up. Shut up.
Well, what I loved about this is because you were talking about like responding to, you know, being a leader and responding to negativity in your group and as a leader. But I felt like your post was universal, that we could all, in these scary political times and everybody has an opinion, you know, I feel like if we didn't necessarily have social media, maybe we would have the ability to kind of come center a little bit more politically and otherwise, because we're never, I don't care what side you're on, we're never going to get where we need to be if we just keep digging our heels in to like, this is my side and I'm not willing to have conversations. I mean, you talked earlier about podcasts and negotiating contracts. Like there's absolutely no negotiation, not only by our leaders in government, but also the people who follow the leaders in government. So, family members, community members, neighbors, now that we are seeing online every opinion that everybody has all of the time, it's really difficult to see eye to eye or come to a place of agreement. And it's sad because I feel like it's contributing to more anxiety and more depression and more angst throughout families and communities. And so one of the things that you did in this post is you actually applied principles that you're teaching your daughter.
Yeah.
And this was the part, like, I will tell you right now, Elsie, I cried because I was like, not only do I think that you're an amazing mom, it's so important as parents who are trying to mold and shape the young minds and the coping skills of our youth and help create really strong, powerful, emotionally healthy young adults, that we actually take the things that we're teaching them and do them ourselves. Yep. I think there's kind of a disconnect there. I see parents trying to teach their kids certain things like coping and not being able to cope themselves. And it's very confusing for kids. So one of the principles that you teach her is that she's not responsible for the first thought that comes into her young mind. And this is the part that got me. But she's responsible for the next thought. Can you explain that a little bit?
There were some behaviors that were getting to a point where we really didn't know what we were going to do with her because she wasn't kind of responding to anything that we were doing. And we felt, and this, all of this stuff is really my partner. He is just such an incredible force of nature. And he is really evolved and super smart. And he's the one that came up with these rules for her. It's in a succinct fashion. And he presented our game plan because there was no exchange with her that wasn't like, stop it. Don't be quiet. Sit down. Don't do that. Don't touch. Quiet. It was to the point where it was just negativity all the way around. And it was destroying our family. It literally was like we could not have a regular normal interaction with each other because it felt as if she was sabotaging our entire existence. Everything was a problem. And so we kind of sat down and, in addition to other things, we do believe that she is hypoglycemic. So we addressed a lot of the food issues with her, like she has to, eat every 3 hours and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, there's extra layers to this. It wasn't just this, but part of it is that we were having meetings with her 3 times a day. So we really went into this. She's 7, by the way. So in the morning, in the middle of the day, and then in the evening, we would have meetings with her, and we had these 3 principles. And one of them was the one that you're saying. And part of it is that we wanted to make sure that the level of her negativity was out of control. You could not say anything to her. That's a really pretty skirt. Well, I wish I had a purple one. And it's like, we went to eat somewhere and we got her favorite burger. Oh, I can't believe you didn't get me the soup. And it was like, okay. And it was just negative responses. And so we sat there, and that's when he said that to her, where he was like, listen, I totally understand your mind sometimes starts saying things to you that are not true, essentially. And that sometimes we have responses and we have like patterns of behavior. And he speaks to her this way, by the way, patterns of behavior in your own brain that you can't control. So it's okay. You're only 7. Totally fine. And so there are going to be times when your first thought is going to come in, and then what you have to do, it's okay if you have a negative thought about stuff. It's okay if you want to just lash out. That's fine. But you can control whatever the next thought is there. You can shift whatever that is. Remember, just because you want to say no, it doesn't necessarily mean at that time it's appropriate for the situation. So you just take a moment and then shift it around. And she really kind of understood that concept. And we just have to tell her down. Remember, it's okay, but there's another choice. You can also make another choice after this. And it started to kind of shift. And for me, it also gave me the opportunity as a grown-up myself to be able to catch that for me too, because we still do that, right? We have internal biases over stuff, or even conscious biases, right? Where we tend to react towards this saying in this way, but we do have the agency to change that with the next thought. And she's really responded very well with it. We practiced it for 2 weeks and we were really impressed with what that did with her. And I think it was, and again, it wasn't just those in quote rules that we had in those meetings. There was a lot that came into that kind of sort of, I don't even know what it is, like strategy with her, because it was like one-on-one time with mommy and daddy. There was like a lot of like, all of us are together and we love you kind of thing. I mean, it was all of these things that were happening, including with the food stuff and giving her food every 3 hours and making sure that her sugars weren't spiking and things like that.
Right.
And so it kind of shifted. And it's like, I mean, to the point where I'm just like, I can't believe this worked. So, wow.
I, first of all, appreciate so much for you to share that, because I think there are so many listeners out there who maybe are going through similar things, whether it's a 7-year-old or a teenager or a 25-year-old or a spouse, you know, I mean, who knows? There are people who are sort of programmed in a way to automatically go for the negative. And I don't know if it's, listen, I'm not a scientist. I don't know if it's a brain thing. I don't know what it is, because as you know, you can raise two people the exact same way, or how you feel is the exact same way, and their reaction to it is totally different. I know for me growing up, if I asked for 3 things and you gave me 2 of them, I would be so focused on the one you didn't give me that it was probably in my 30s, maybe even into my early 40s, where I reprogrammed my brain to be grateful for the things I have and not focus on the things I don't have. And my happiness level is not even comparable. It's just, I'm just at a much better place in my life because I am filled with gratitude for what I have versus, don't get me wrong, I still work for the things I don't have that I want, but I'm not a victim of them. And so to be able to work with a young mind at 7 years old to kind of shift the brain, we have lots and lots of unconscious thoughts that really can mess with us. And so if we're to go back to online, if we're scanning Facebook, looking for anything that we can just latch onto, and maybe our mother drove us crazy earlier, or our spouse didn't, take out the trash like he said, and we're so frustrated with what's happening in real life that we're looking for anything online to comment on or to, attack. It's good to have some of these practices in place to go, hey, you know what? You don't have to. I mean, you actually have a choice whether you want to be happy in your life or, I hate to quote Dr. Phil. He would say, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
Right.
It's truly a choice online and in real life, whether you want to be right. Everybody has their own personal triggers and need to be seen and heard in this way. But you have a choice of going out there and communicating online in a way that is effective and impactful and kind, or, just spewing your opinions everywhere.
We're sharing our voices. We have to really address all these things. We have to be doing the inner work. It's so hard because we are dealing with each other online, and there's a sense of typing something versus saying it to somebody. So I'm glad that I'm able to talk with you about this too, because there's so much more nuance that you can get from a conversation above and beyond something I wrote, right? You can get like deeper into the layers. And that's what the gift of this podcasting space is about, the sharing of our thoughts in this way.
Absolutely. And, you just made me think of something that people could do, including us, is read your comment out loud before you actually submit it.
Yep.
Would you really say that? That's a whole other episode.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So before we go, what does it mean to you to 40 Thrive?
My ability to own up to all of the things that I am, and to have the courage to see all of my faults, and to know that those faults aren't necessarily they don't make me a bad person. It just having the confidence and the courage to look at where you could be better it doesn't make you less of a person. It just gives you the scope. I think now when we're 40, it's like, you can just say like, okay, I'll deal with that. You know what I mean? I'll address it. Like instead of usually, I think in my 20s and my 30s, it was more of a victim kind of place. Whereas now I'm like, okay, yeah, I see that.
That's really what it's all about is knowing that nobody's perfect, but also like where are the areas that you can be better and working toward them, not beating yourself up about them, not feeling like, you know, you're a loser and hopeless. But like, hey, these are my areas right now. And guess what? In 10 years, you're going to have different areas to work on. You know? And so I love that answer. So Elsie Escobar, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You can find Elsie online on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Elsie Escobar. And as I'm recording this outro, seriously, I've got some serious breaking news. Elsie is about to launch a new podcast, and I'm excited to share it with those of you who are my Spanish-speaking thrivers. Sobre Podcasting with Elsie Escobar is a Spanish-speaking podcasting show focusing on Spanish-speaking podcasters and building community, offering a more global perspective. Her podcast is going to be featuring Spanish-speaking voices from the whole world. I love this. Elsie has always been an advocate for women of color and voices that are marginalized. And I love that she is moving forward in this way. And so whether you are a Spanish-speaking podcaster or not, go Elsie. I'm really excited for your new venture. If you'd like to follow her new podcast, go to the show notes at 40thrive.com/episode 31, and I'll share more info. Thank you so much for listening. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. You don't have time to go searching for podcasts. I get that. This way, you'll get alerted automatically when there's a new episode. I wish the rest of our lives were that easy, right? And don't forget to share with a friend. You know the one. She could benefit from this episode. Until next time, take care and keep thriving.